threw him away. Boy, it still bothers me that somebody would have the audacity to throw somebody else away like that piece of shoulders. Because when I first saw that little feller's face, it was like he was screaming help to me. The only help I know to do is to call 911. And that's what I did. It's about that little boy that they threw away like it's a piece of trash. That's what bothers me worse than anything in the world, because I've got 5 grandbabies.
It was just after 7 p.m. when he stepped into the woods. Boots sinking into damp leaves, eyes scanning for mushrooms, not meaning to trespass, just curious. Then he saw it, a suitcase, bright blue, just sitting there, alone, untouched, like someone had placed it, not tossed it. At first he thought someone was moving. Maybe they dropped it by accident. But it wasn't heavy with clothes. It wasn't even zipped tight. It had a strange stillness to it, a wrongness. He stepped closer, knelt down and unzipped the case. Inside, beneath a pillow and a garbage bag, was a small figure, completely still, fragile, unmoving, a quiet presence that seemed to reach out for help without sound. And that's when he called 911. In the days that followed, the world would come to know the child's name. But for a time, he was simply called Angel, because no one knew who he was. No alerts had gone out. No one had stepped forward. Not a single report had been filed. But the deeper truth wasn't just what was found in the woods that day. It was everything that came before it, and the unsettling belief that somehow this child was viewed as something less than human. This case is emotionally difficult and centers around a young child. Please take care while watching. Cairo Ammar Jordan was born on October 24th, 2016 in Atlanta, Georgia. By all accounts, he was a cheerful, curious little boy with a deep love for dinosaurs. His energy filled rooms, and his smile often lit up the faces of those around him. Family members who knew him described him as playful, gentle, and full of life. He was the kind of child who found wonder in small things, his toys, his imagination, and the world around him. His parents were Dejon Ludi Anderson and Vincent Charles Jordan Jr. Initially, there appeared to be a shared desire to co-parent, but just a year into Cairo's life, things changed. By 2017, a custody dispute emerged. What began as a legal disagreement between 2 parents would slowly evolve into a quiet disappearance, one where Cairo's paternal side of the family would be edged out, not through any formal custody ruling, but through complete disconnection. Vincent Jordan Jr. stated that he tried to maintain contact. He wanted to be involved in his son's life, but each attempt reportedly met resistance. He claimed that Dejon blocked his efforts to visit, stopped showing up to scheduled court appearances, and kept Cairo from any relationship with his father's side. Calls were unanswered. Updates ceased. By the time Cairo was 3, his paternal family had lost track of him entirely. He had been removed from their world, and they had no idea where he had gone. It wasn't just the father who lost access. Extended relatives were also cut off. Locations were no longer shared. Social media presence around Cairo became minimal. There was no formal declaration that he had been taken or hidden, just a slow erasure from one side of his family tree. In this period of isolation, a new figure emerged. Dawn Elaine Coleman. Friends with Dejon, Dawn was not a relative, though she would later claim otherwise. She began traveling with Dejon and living alongside her in Cairo. As Dejon moved from place to place, Dawn was there. She was not a distant friend or occasional guest. She was embedded in their daily lives. At times, according to social media posts and later records, Dawn was the one caring for Cairo when Dejon was unavailable. They operated as a pair, 2 adults who kept Cairo largely out of sight from those who once cared for him. There were no formal reports during this time, no welfare checks, no known intervention from Child Protective Services. Cairo was simply off the radar. No alerts were raised, and no inquiries were made that reached official channels. The system had no record of concern. This is what makes the case so difficult and so haunting. There were no dramatic outbursts, no calls to emergency services, no school reports or red flags passed along to authorities. What happened to Cairo didn't come after years of known turmoil. It happened quietly, in the space between assumptions and silence. The people around him, those entrusted with his care, were not strangers. They were the ones closest to him. And the failure wasn't just personal, it was institutional. A child separated from one half of his family, with no active oversight and no one officially checking in. Cairo's life was short, and much of it existed in places where no one was looking. Not because no one cared, but because the people who did were kept in the dark. And the ones who should have stepped in never got the chance. On March 12, 2022, deputies in South Carolina attempted to initiate a traffic stop on a 2019 Dodge Challenger. The vehicle had been clocked well above the posted speed limit. When officers signaled for the driver to pull over, the car accelerated instead. What followed was an extended pursuit spanning more than 30 miles. Behind the wheel was 37-year-old Dejon Anderson. In the back seat was her young son. The pursuit ended when the vehicle coasted to a halt, not from intervention, but from a lack of fuel. Officers approached cautiously. The doors were shut. When verbal commands went unanswered, officers began tapping on the windows. Eventually, a passenger door opened. The woman inside identified herself as Dawn Coleman. She calmly stated that a child was present and that there was nothing to be alarmed about. Both women were detained. Officers received inconsistent responses about the child's identity. One moment he was Jordan, the next Jason. Despite the confusion, law enforcement determined there was no immediate legal cause to hold the child. He was placed in Coleman's care temporarily. Hotel accommodations were arranged by deputies for her and the boy to stay the night. Anderson was booked on traffic-related offenses, including reckless driving and endangerment, and processed into Colleton County Jail. She was released the following day. Less than 3 weeks later, on March the 31st, Anderson was spotted again, this time in Louisville, Kentucky, hundreds of miles away. Surveillance footage from Oxmoor Mall showed her walking through a department store. According to reports, she was observed placing items into a personal bag without paying. Mall security confronted her near the exit. As one guard attempted to guide her back, an altercation occurred. She was detained and transferred to Jefferson County Jail on charges related to theft and physical contact with mall personnel. During this time, her son was again left in the care of Dawn Coleman. Both were reportedly staying with a relative of Coleman's in the Louisville area. Cell tower data and call records later confirmed this arrangement. Though not flagged at the time, their movements during this period would eventually become central to the investigation. Between April 8th and April 14th, a shift in tone appeared across the public social media pages of both women. These posts were unlike anything that had appeared previously. They contained references to energy cleansing, ancestral rituals, and spiritual interference. The wording grew more intense by the day. Terms like third eye, spiritual vessel, and soul separation appeared frequently. One post referenced a powerful force housed in a child's form. Another spoke of needing to complete a spiritual act to protect oneself. The content suggested a belief system that had grown increasingly removed from reality. But no intervention took place, no alerts were sent, and no psychological evaluation was conducted. These were just digital messages, left unchecked and unchallenged. Then on April 14th, a crucial timestamp appeared. Cell tower data showed both Anderson and Coleman present in a wooded area off Holder Road in Washington County, Indiana. According to investigators, their devices remained in the area for approximately 45 minutes. There were no incident reports, no calls for assistance, and no signs of concern observed by the public. But what happened during that brief window of time would later take center stage in a case that stunned multiple jurisdictions. The online messages, the cross-state travel, the sequence of arrests, each would form a piece of a puzzle that had yet to be fully revealed. Between April 12th and April 14th, 2022, Cairo, Jordan disappeared from public view. There were no police reports, no emergency calls, no outreach to medical professionals. What happened during that window of time would only be understood after investigators began reconstructing the final days of his life using cell tower data, forensic records, and personal communications. It was later determined through the coroner's findings that Cairo had been ill. His condition showed clear signs of dehydration, consistent with prolonged vomiting and fluid loss. There was no indication of external harm. No injuries or trauma that would typically raise immediate red flags. His body told a quieter, but no less serious story, one of untreated illness, and ultimately of being left without care. The diagnosis was severe dehydration, most likely caused by gastroenteritis. It is a condition that, in most cases, is treatable, but it requires attention, fluids, monitoring, a decision to intervene. That decision, according to investigators, never came. Once it became clear that Cairo had passed, what followed next was not a call for help or an attempt to explain. Instead, it was an attempt to remove him from view entirely. Authorities confirmed that the suitcase found on Holder Road, a hard shell, blue piece of luggage marked with a Las Vegas design, belonged to Dawn Coleman. Inside it, wrapped in household materials, was Cairo. Though there were no external injuries, forensic analysis confirmed the child had not been moved for some time. Investigators determined that the suitcase had been placed in the woods along a tree line, not buried, but left where it would eventually be seen. No attempt was made to alert the public. No effort to explain what had happened to law enforcement. Cairo was simply gone and left behind without a name. It was an act not of violence, but of silence. One that concealed not just a child, but the failure to help him when he needed it most. On the evening of April 16, 2022, a man named Jeffrey Meredith walked into a wooded area near his home along Holder Road in Washington County, Indiana. He was out searching for mushrooms, something he did regularly. But that evening, his routine took an unexpected turn. Near the tree line, he noticed a bright blue suitcase. It stood upright, clean, positioned deliberately, and clearly out of place. When he looked inside, he knew immediately that something was wrong. He contacted 911, and law enforcement arrived shortly after.
They threw him away. Boy, it still bothers me that somebody would have the audacity to throw somebody else away like that. Because when I first saw that little feller's face, it was like he was screaming help to me. The only help I know to do is to call 911, and that's what I did.
What they discovered prompted a complex, multi-jurisdictional investigation. The first problem investigators faced was identification. There were no recent reports of a missing child matching the profile. No alerts had been filed. No one had come forward. Without a name or clear origin, the public began referring to the child simply as Angel, a temporary name, one given by strangers who cared, even though they didn't know him.
Community has embraced this little boy from day one, had a funeral for him, and everything came together and paid for everything, or it was donated. So I am glad that finally justice will be served.
The Indiana State Police, working with the Washington County Sheriff's Office, began a detailed forensic analysis. Evidence collected from the suitcase included several items sealed and handled with care. Investigators recovered usable fingerprints from some of the inner materials. These were submitted to national databases for comparison. It took time, but on June 29, 2022, the first match came back. A set of fingerprints was linked to a woman named Dejon Ludi Anderson. That match led investigators into a broader inquiry. Who was Dejon Ludi Anderson? Where had she been? And who had she been traveling with? Authorities followed the trail into digital forensics. Court-approved access to mobile records, location data, and online platforms provided a fuller picture of movement and communications. These logs confirmed what came next. Less than a month later, on July 25th, a second match was confirmed. Another set of fingerprints, collected from the same suitcase, was connected to Dawn Coleman, an associate of Anderson. With two identities now verified, law enforcement widened their scope. Surveillance footage pulled from multiple sources showed a pattern. A residential camera near Holder Road captured a Dodge Challenger, registered to Anderson, traveling through the area at a time that aligned with earlier phone data. The car was the same make and model involved in a separate incident week earlier in South Carolina. Investigators then turned to social media. Subpoenaed access to both Anderson's and Coleman's accounts uncovered a string of public posts written in the weeks prior to April 16th. The content was unconventional. Posts included mentions of spiritual concepts, emotional conflict, and vague references to energy and protection rituals. While not directly incriminating, when placed beside the physical evidence, the posts raised concern. The language suggested a mindset moving further away from reason. From the outside, it appeared erratic, but to law enforcement, it provided context. Investigators established a digital timeline. Cell towers confirmed both women were present near the wooded area in the days before the suitcase was found. Location pings, travel routes, and communication timestamps formed a map that led straight to Holder Road. The evidence was not based on a single clue. It came from dozens of sources, phone records, fingerprints, surveillance, and the women's own public posts. Together, these formed the foundation of a case that was beginning to reveal a deeply unsettling truth. A child had vanished and no one had sounded the alarm. In October 2022, Dawn Coleman was located in California and taken into custody. Her name had already been connected to the forensic evidence found in Washington County, Indiana. Fingerprints, travel records, and cell tower data placed her at the scene. Investigators had also linked her online activity to a series of unusual and concerning public posts in the weeks surrounding the case. Confronted with the weight of this evidence, Coleman agreed to a plea deal. On November 21, 2024, she was sentenced to 30 years in prison with 5 years suspended. As part of the agreement, she pledged to testify truthfully in any legal proceedings involving her co-defendant, Dijon Anderson. In court, Coleman admitted to helping conceal what had happened. She confirmed her presence during key moments and acknowledged that she had assisted in covering up the events that followed. She denied initiating the actions that led to the case, but accepted her role in what unfolded afterward. Her cooperation with prosecutors played a significant role in the terms of her sentence. While Coleman entered the legal system, Dijon Anderson became harder to find. After a warrant was issued for her arrest, Anderson left known locations and was considered a fugitive. Law enforcement tracked digital leads across several states. She remained off the radar for nearly 2 years, despite national attention and public awareness. Then, on March 14, 2024, she was located in Santa Monica, California. Using multiple aliases and avoiding established contacts, Anderson had avoided detection until that point. Once apprehended, she was transported back to Indiana to face the charges already filed in connection to the case. Later that year, in August 2024, a psychiatric evaluation was requested by her legal counsel. The court granted the motion. Following a mental health assessment, Anderson was found not competent to stand trial at that time. She was placed in the care of Logansport State Hospital, a facility specializing in mental health evaluations and treatment. Over the following months, her condition was closely monitored. Then, in February 2025, a reassessment was completed. This time, the court determined she was competent to proceed with trial. A formal date was scheduled for October 7, 2025. In pretrial hearings, Anderson submitted several handwritten motions, documents that included long, often unconventional arguments unrelated to the core charges. The presiding judge, Chris Medlock, reviewed these filings and issued an order to suppress those that did not meet legal standards or fell outside courtroom procedure. The court maintained that while every defendant has a right to participate in their defense, proceedings must remain focused on verified evidence and applicable law. At present, Anderson remains in custody, awaiting trial. She has not been convicted, sentenced, or entered any plea in this case. The charges against her are still pending, and the court has not yet ruled on guilt or innocence. This case highlights a broader challenge often faced by the legal system: how to address issues of mental health within the framework of accountability and due process. It raises questions about capacity, intent, and the ability of the justice system to respond effectively when serious allegations intersect with psychological complexity. With a trial now scheduled, the case is poised to move from investigation to judgment. For investigators, legal teams, and families involved, it marks the beginning of the next phase, where evidence will be tested, testimony will be heard, and the events behind one of the most unsettling child protection failures in recent memory will be publicly examined. There was no Amber Alert, no missing child report, no outreach from schools, family services, or concerned relatives. Cairo Jordan's absence didn't trigger protocol because no one in the system had been alerted that he was gone. Despite 2 separate arrests involving Dijon Anderson within weeks of each other, one involving a high-speed chase with a child in the vehicle, and another involving an altercation with mall security, there were no wellness checks conducted on Cairo. No social services inquiry, no follow-up from authorities across jurisdictions. She was released both times on bond. No questions asked about who was caring for the child, no coordination between the law enforcement agencies in South Carolina, Kentucky, or Indiana. 3 states, 3 separate encounters with authorities. And still no system flagged Cairo as a child in danger. This wasn't a single oversight. It was a pattern, a cascade of missed steps, each one avoidable, each one in isolation, small. But together they formed a silence that lasted long enough for the unthinkable to happen. By the time Cairo was found, the only people who came forward were strangers. In Salem, Indiana, the community offered him dignity when no one else had. A casket was donated, a service was held, and for a time, he was known only by the name they gave him, Angel. Not because they knew who he was, but because no one else had claimed him. This case didn't slip through the cracks because of one person. It happened because the cracks were wide, deep, and already there. When a child is isolated, it rarely looks urgent from the outside. But distance, especially from family, should always raise questions. When someone begins cutting off contact, changing locations, or avoiding shared responsibilities, that's when the right questions matter most. In Cairo's case, there were signs, but they were spread across people, places, and platforms that weren't speaking to each other. That disconnection became the very thing that let this case go unnoticed. Caregivers, educators, neighbors, each has a role in keeping children safe. But trust alone isn't a safeguard. When a parent begins removing a child from all outside contact, especially during conflict or instability, that's not just personal. It becomes a risk factor. Systems can only do so much when the warnings don't reach them. But when they do, action matters. A single wellness check, a verified report, a mental health screening after a high-risk arrest. These aren't just procedures, they're lifelines. Cairo's story is not just a case, it's a signal. One that should be shared with courts, schools, child protection agencies, and anyone in a position to intervene before it's too late. This video includes additional resources in the description. National and local numbers to call. Please take a moment to save or share them. Awareness isn't enough unless it's followed by action. Cairo Ammar Jordan was only 5 years old. He had a future ahead of him, a boy who loved dinosaurs, a child who trusted the adults around him, and a name that was almost lost to silence. What happened to him wasn't inevitable. It was a chain of preventable events, missed signals, ignored reports, and fractured systems. Now there's an opportunity, not just for justice, but for change. If this story moved you, share it. Subscribe if you believe no child should be overlooked. And if you can also share this video, it helps spread awareness. To everyone who watches, listens, and speaks out, you help turn silence into action. Your voice makes a difference. You help turn pain into purpose. And you help make sure Cairo is never forgotten.